Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We have a Wednesday. Today is the 25th day of February. We are, as you know, into the last week of the month of February, and I think for most people, at least in the eastern and southern parts of the United States, I think people are going to do everything they can to encourage a quick end to the month of February. It's been memorable weather-wise, and I hope that you are enjoying good weather for a while anyway. Where you are, we're looking at a couple of inches of snow this evening, but compared to what we've had, what can you say? With a projected warm-up in our area coming next week, and by that we mean mid-40s, which is high enough, to be very honest with you, given the amount of snow we got on the ground. We don't want to, if we could melt it gradually and avoid flooding, I think that would be a plus. Thank you for joining us today on this Wednesday program here at the Virtual Center. Just a couple of important pieces of information at the outset of the program, and I'll try to mention this again at today's midpoint when we begin our second hour. We are not going to be able to do any live broadcasting next week of the Virtual Center. This one doesn't have that much to do with me directly, but the production capabilities for the folks at Head On are going to be out of pocket next week. And Bob Kincaid is going to be in D.C., I believe, next week. And so consequently, we're unable to produce the program. And again, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of archived programming that are available to you, and I hope that you will avail yourself of it. I also hope that with that in mind, I'm thinking that the issues that we will be addressing today will be the kind of issues that those of you out there who are really interested in this subject, and I think when we get into it, I think you'll realize that many of you are, that we can spend the time productively, all of us, over the next week, pursuing this issue, which is multifaceted. I was mentioning to Bob yesterday, to Bob Kincaid yesterday, after the program, that maybe it was before the program, that I envision 5 or 6 programs on the kind of issues we'll be dealing with today. But since we will not have live programming next week, rather than just begin to plod through those issues, I think what I'll try to do today is spend our time together, and we have the full 2 hours today, trying to do somewhat of an overview of the entire topic. And that would basically, hopefully, establish the relevance of the subject and the importance of the subject. And then when we get back together again, week after next, we can begin to address the overview issues one by one. And again, I think we'll probably have 5 or 6 programs here at the Virtual Center devoted to this particular issue. So I'm excited about it. I would love to hear from you. If you were with us yesterday, you may know that our regular listener, Horst, called in from Taiwan, and the entire second hour of our program yesterday was comprised of a 3-way discussion with Bob Kincaid, Horst, and myself on the issue of the ones who walk away from Omelas, which is the short story that we spent so much time on some weeks ago. And Horst has been chomping at the bit, he said, for an opportunity to call in and revisit that particular short story. And he made the comment almost apologetically at the outset that he hoped that he wouldn't be beating a dead horse. And I don't think, given the issues raised in that short story, that horse is ever dead. if I can use that metaphor a little bit further. I thought the conversation was rich and deep. I would like to say that it was a three-way conversation, but I really felt that Bob and Horst contributed so much that I'd rather call it a 2.5-way conversation, because I had a few things to contribute, but basically I just kind of spent much of the time listening, and again appreciating the value of this kind of conversation and this kind of exchange. That's what I dream about here at the Virtual Center, that as we cover these primary topics and people become more and more conversant and comfortable with some of the issues and some of the perspectives related to the founders and related to the establishment, the creation of the Constitution and its overall ramifications, as we have moved through American history and are dealing with issues of the present day, that we can see both the relevance of the dangers to or the threats to our constitutional system, our republic. And again, I think you'll find with today's program that that's really going to be one of the themes that I think is going to be most significant in today's program. Basically, what I'm going to propose, given the subject matter that we'll be dealing with today, is that this issue, I believe, I agree with some of the people who are involved in it, and I'll explain who they are in a moment, that this issue poses perhaps the greatest threat to the continued existence of this republic that there is. I believe it's that important. And I am so excited to find that others, and I don't just mean others like myself and Bob Kincaid and others who are really concerned about these issues, but I'm thinking of very prominent people that we'll be talking about a little bit today, see this as a major issue as well. I see that as a tremendously exciting event, because I really believe that with the right kinds of people becoming involved and interested in this and aware of the threats to the republic that these kinds of issues pose, that we have a much better chance of finding our way out of this morass and countering what's going on with something much more productive, much more humanity-based or human-based, people-based, if you will, and much more in tune with the priorities of the kind of progressive thinking that really defines those who are regular participants at the Head On Radio Network and also here at the Virtual Center. So I'm very, very excited about it. I would love to hear from you. If you have comments on yesterday's program or you have comments on some of the issues today, please don't worry about calling at the wrong time. If something occurs to you at the moment, that's the moment to call. And get your ideas on the table while they are fresh in your mind. Because if you wait until an appropriate moment, you'll probably lose the importance or the significance of the issue. I find that myself. In fact, I found that during the discussion yesterday in the course of something that Bob said or something that Horst said about the short story on Amalas. I would think of something and I'd say, wait, I'm going to wait until Horst makes this point because I don't want to interrupt him. And then he would make his point and I would tune into that and I would totally lose the point that I kind of thought was very, very important, not a minute or a minute and a half earlier. So I encourage you when the issue or the urge strikes you, so to speak, I am going to give us a call and let us all enjoy and participate and benefit from your thinking and your ideas and your concerns and your suggestions and all the rest of it. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And of course you know that 4676 translates on your keypad into Horn, H-O-R-N. My email address, if you'd like to communicate with me on some of these issues one-on-one, and not do it by phone, I can understand that. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906, all one word, no gmail.com. Just a comment, a closing comment or observation based on the discussion yesterday about Omelas. And again, I don't want to take any significant time away from today's program, because I really do believe that that anything that I would say about the subject that we talked about yesterday would merely diminish the significance and the importance of some of the things that Horst contributed and some of the things that Bob Kincaid contributed as well. We are blessed, and I think you all know that. We are blessed to have some of the most creative, insightful, innovative thinkers that exist involved, either directly or indirectly, in the Head On Radio Network effort. And I mean the participants, the listeners, those people out there, the people like Horst and some of the other folks that are regular participants and regular supporters of the Head On Radio Network. Not only for what they can contribute and do contribute to the overall discussion and overall understanding of the issues on the table at any particular time, but also because the mere fact that they are involved and listeners and supporters and participants in the Head On Radio Network seems to me to identify them as very important people in today's world. These are the people with the kinds of ideas and the kinds of thoughts and the kinds of contributions that we really need to cultivate and find a way that we can give voice to these people. And I think that's very important. I think it's a credit not only to the folks that developed Head On, but I think it's a credit to the people who regularly participate in it. Because what it suggests, given the nature of the issues involved, is that the people who support and participate in this effort are the kind of progressive thinkers that all of us need right now. And that is very, very important. And consequently, the continuation of Head On and its ability to continue to come to you on a regular basis, and its ability to support a program like the Virtual Center, all of those things become so much more important to keep on the air, to keep that voice out there, to keep that forum out there. I think, again, I think all of you, we're blessed. We're blessed to have the kind of thinkers, not only who develop the programming, but also the people who participate and listen in it and support it and follow it regularly and do everything they can to move what I think is an important effort forward. The one thing that I would add yesterday, during the course of the discussion about the ones who walk away from Omelas, and if you listened, you'll remember that the conversation was focusing in part, at least, around the issue of what do the people at Omelas do. It talks about the fact that they have parades and they have races and they have music and they enjoy the scenery and and the parks and all of this stuff. The fact of the matter is, what the conversation was really getting around to, it seems to me, was the nature of the priority system. And one of the things we were talking about, the conversation was focusing on, was the extent to which the author of the short story, Ursula Le Guin, was aware and was even critical. And we talked about this yesterday. Horst made the point that she even says, if you want beer, we'll add beer. If you want bullet trains, we'll add bullet trains. And basically what she was saying is there's much more substance, more important substance than those kinds of things. And what, to me, she seemed to be saying was, our priorities are all screwed up. Or what she was saying is, I know that your priorities, all of our priorities, are screwed up. And we put our emphasis on the wrong things. And so if you want to add some of those things that you think are important, fine, we'll add them. Because what she's in effect saying is they don't really pertain to the essence of what we're talking about here in Omelas in terms of the nature of life and the nature of community and the ability of people to interrelate and all the rest of it. In other words, what it seemed to me she was saying was we need to basically separate the significance from the less significant, if you will. And we need to recognize that while our culture and our way of life seems to drive us toward emphasizing certain set of priorities, the fact of the matter is there's much more to life than that. And I think Horst made the point so well yesterday that there's an awful lot of Eastern philosophy, the Eastern way of looking at the world, looking at the universe, if you will. The idea of Buddhism and Hinduism and Zen and all of these things and what they essentially mean, because they focus on the heart, on the soul, if you will, of the culture, of humanity, if you will. And they seem to have a better grip on being able to get at and to identify and put their arms around the most important things, and therefore they are able to kind of write off the less important things as so much fluff. At the beginning of yesterday's program, before Horst called in, I was sharing with everyone toward the end of our first hour yesterday this issue of the relationship between the power of the federal government, the state government, and now what's happening with cities and municipalities throughout the nation in some of the states that the conservative movement has taken over in recent elections. And the irony, we were talking about the irony or the paradox or the contradiction between the fact that many of these conservatives were arguing that we need to minimize and shrink the size and the influence of government and its regulatory capabilities in order to set free the economic freedom that's going to promote the kind of growth and happiness in our society that all of us want. In other words, the basic premise on which the right attacked federal government and the ability of the federal government to do what it can do to promote the so-called public interest seemed to focus around a certain perspective or a certain point of view. And right now, since so many state legislatures and governors' mansions are controlled by Republicans, it would stand to reason that their political success on the state level would translate into opportunities to give their ideas and their priorities about individual freedom and local control of schools and all these other things an opportunity to flourish. But lo and behold, what we see is just the opposite. That now that these conservative Republicans control state legislatures and control so many of the nation's governorships, they seem intent on stifling the kind of local control in cities and towns that they feel inhibits their own priorities. And what we are also seeing is that more and more their priorities complement or are consistent with the priorities of business, of industry, of Wall Street, of big money, of investment, of financial considerations, if you will. And so consequently, these legislatures are doing everything they can to stifle and derail efforts of local communities and municipalities to make the kinds of decisions that they feel will benefit their people in their limited or restricted political area or region, whether it's a municipality or a county or a city. And so consequently, what we see is a paradox between the priorities that enabled these people to gain control of state legislatures and how in response to that, what they are doing now is doing everything they can do to protect their own power by contradicting their own priorities when it comes to the efforts of cities and municipalities to take control over their own government apparatus. And we were talking about that in relationship to Amalas and the priorities that are so visible in Amalas. One of the issues that I brought to the table, and this again was before Horst called and raised the issue of Amalas itself, one of the issues I was talking about was an article in yesterday's New York Times about the threatened secession of 13 communities, towns, along what is called the Southern Tier in New York State, right along the northern border of Pennsylvania, that feel that their potential economic growth and individual freedom is being threatened by the Governor Cuomo, who just recently banned fracking in the state of New York, recognizing that fracking is running full steam ahead in the state of Pennsylvania. And what these people in the southern parts, the southern communities in New York are saying is, as they look across the border into Pennsylvania, they see all of this growth, all this movement, these jobs being created, economic opportunities being made available, and they're being denied that because of the decisions coming out of the state capital in Albany. And one of the advocates or people most involved in this movement for independence among these southern tier communities in New York that claim that they are being deprived of work and they are being denied the rights that they feel should be theirs as property owners. In other words, their argument is, I own this land, and what I want to do with it underneath, if I want to let companies come in and drill and pursue fracking opportunities on my land, I ought to be able to do it because it's mine. And of course, what we get into here is the whole issue of the public interest versus private interest. And we're seeing it playing out here. But no sooner did we introduce this issue than Horst called and raised the issue of Amalas, and we began to talk about the priorities that seem to be existent in Amalas. And we are confronted with the question of what really are the most important issues and what are the issues that ought not to be there. One of the people involved in the secession movement in New York's name is Jim Finch. And he made the following comment about what the people in New York see happening as they look across the border into Pennsylvania. And he says, quote, "Everybody over the border has new cars, new four-wheelers, new snowmobiles. They have new roofs, new siding," unquote. It seemed to me, in the context of our discussion yesterday about Amalas, that these people in southern New York who are saying that happiness and success involves four-wheelers and snowmobiles and new cars and new roofs and new siding and boats and that kind of thing, I would suggest these are the very people, this is the very mentality that Ursula Le Guin was addressing in her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Amalas. Basically, what she does in her short story is point out the flaws in thinking of people who believe that these are life's priorities. when in fact she's suggesting that there were really much more important humane priorities that are being lost in the shuffle. And her point is they're in Omelas, but none of us seem to be able to see them or appreciate them. But then when you introduce the issue of the child in the basement, that we can understand, because that's the world we're used to. I thought this particular quote from Jim French, in the context of the discussion we had about the priorities of the community of Omelas, seemed to become much louder and much more significant to me. Four-wheelers, snowmobiles, cars, roofs, siding, boats, vacation cabins, the kinds of things. I mean, think of the advertising on television about new automobiles. Think about the advertising from cruise lines about cruises to the Caribbean and South America and the Mediterranean, and cruises on the rivers of Europe. And the lifestyle associated with going on a cruise. And these seem to be the priorities that all of us work for and all of us save for. My guess is those who are steeped in Eastern philosophy would raise serious questions with us about whether, if you sit down and think about it, are these really the priorities of life? If you have one shot on this earth for 50, 60, 70, even 80 years, if you will, is this what you want to do with it? Or is there more? And if there's more, is it worth looking for? And of course, the Eastern philosophy, the Eastern way of life, as it were, was oriented towards the idea that what life is really all about is trying to get there, trying to understand this reality, this truth that seems to be out there that most of us either don't see or don't know how to reach or don't know how to touch. And what much of the Eastern thinkers are saying is that in reality what life is about is the ability to connect to that. That's what Emerson was talking about in the concept of the oversoul. And the idea that what life is really about is the pursuit of the kind of knowledge and wisdom that's going to give us a true appreciation about what life really ought to be about. And I saw in the discussion about Omelas in the short story, I saw that kind of recognition within that story. And I think this comment here from New York about how we look across the borders and we see people putting new siding on the house and driving new cars and pulling boats into the yard and buying snowmobiles and all the rest of it. They've got it made. They know what happiness is, and we're being denied it because the governor has made the decision that we can't have fracking in the state of New York. Damn it, we'll secede from New York, and we'll affix ourselves and become citizens of the state of Pennsylvania. It's bizarre, because all of it speaks to me to almost an extreme runaway version of liberty. In fact, in this discussion yesterday about the states trying to limit the abilities of local towns and communities to take control over their own lives, what they're saying is, now that we, conservative Republicans, have control of the state legislature, now that we control the state, our objectives have been achieved. Thank you very much. It stops. Ironically, that's what happened in the 1780s at the time of the founders. That many of those people that found themselves out in front of the independence movement against Great Britain were prominent people in America whose opportunities they felt were being stifled by the connection with the mother country. Once the Declaration of Independence was approved, once the War for Independence began, and especially once independence was won with the Peace Treaty of 1783, many of these same people who were revolutionary leaders in the late 70s and early 80s became conservative advocates for reform that led to the Constitution of the United States. Their position being all the rhetoric about a republic and about freedom and consent of the governed and power to the people and all of these other phrases that were being thrown around in order to promote and build a movement that would produce independence were fine in that context. But once independence was secured, many people, Sam Adams being one, were kind of throwing up their hands and saying, that's it, the right people are controlled now, the movement's over, it stops. And many people in America, working people, poor people, many kept saying, it may be over for you, but we haven't gotten our benefits yet. I don't see any improvement in my life. I don't see where I've gained anything from independence. And so what you have in the 1880s is this pressure. And many of the leaders of independence in the 70s and early 80s become conservative opponents of popular government in the mid and late 80s. And they become advocates for the kind of constitutional change that leads to the Constitutional Convention and produces the Constitution of the United States. I really think that this kind of perspective and these kinds of questions are critical to understanding the period of the founding and the kinds of circumstances and situations which produced the Constitution of the United States and motivated the people who drafted it and worked to get it ratified. I think that's what we're about here at the Virtual Center. I believe it's relevant to today's world, and I think the kinds of things that are going on in today's world, in the political struggles between conservatives and liberals, and power with, advocates of federal power versus advocates of state power versus advocates of local and municipal power, are merely reliving, recarrying out, renewing a discussion and debate that happened 200 and some odd years ago. I think there's a lot to be learned here. I hope that here at the Virtual Center we can get that point across. We've just turned the bottom of our first hour today. It's 33 minutes after the hour, devoted 30 some odd minutes of our program today to that issue, which I really hadn't intended to do, but I think I've made a pattern of that, so I kind of apologize for it. Let me introduce, if I can, some of the issues and events that have gone into what I would like to address as the major issue for the rest of our program today. And again, let me begin even before we get into that by reminding you again that our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. If you would like to comment on any of the issues just raised, or you would like to offer other comments about the discussion yesterday on Omelas, then it would be a perfect time to do that. As you know, I drove to Florida 2 weeks ago. In fact, 2 weeks ago yesterday, I left and spent 2 days driving to South Florida. And as you know, and we were doing archived programs here at the Virtual Center during that period. One of the things that occurred while I was in the car driving was that I was listening to Sirius Radio. And I came across in channel surfing, if you will, the Michael Smerconish program, which is available on Sirius Radio station 124 on the network they call POTUS, P-O-T-U-S, Politics of the United States. And part of that initiative on that particular network is a 3-hour interactive talk show on Sirius hosted by Michael Smerconish. And I know many of you know Michael Smerconish and know of him. I'm guessing that a lot of people don't necessarily like him because they feel that he's too conservative. There's no question that he is. I mean, the fact that he is clearly right of center is beyond debate. But what is significant, and I think a bit creditable on his part, is that his program claims to be devoid, as much as he can make it devoid, of political ideological bias. He believes that he is pursuing programming that would really fall within the parameters of fair and balanced. We won't get into the other one who claims that, but clearly isn't. And Michael Smerconish is on top of some of the major issues which are driving and informing American politics in today's world. The issues of foreign policy associated with ISIS, the issues of whether in fact this is this war against ISIS is a war against fundamentalist Islam, or whether it's war against a bunch of thugs who are trying to legitimize their quest for power and brutality by linking it to the teachings of Islam. And President Obama's insistence that we may be at war against extreme terrorism, extremist terrorists, but we are not at war with Islam, and this is not, and he made this point last week in his addresses, this is not a war that involves a clash of civilizations, which a lot of people are trying to make it. And while that seems to be a priority of the right in this country, is to force the debate into that particular parameter. In other words, to force the debate to the right of center, if you will. President Obama's effort seems to be in the opposite direction. And one of the things that I was, able to conclude and appreciate in Smerconish is that he is extremely aware of the issues and very supportive of President Obama's position that we are not at war with Islam. We are at war with people who claim to be Islamists. The other factor is that what they really are, and he makes this point over and over again, are fundamentalist Islamists. In other words, what we claim to be extremism is what logically follows from their fundamentalism. So in a sense, these are not thugs who are hijacking the religion of Islam for their own political and military purposes, but rather the leaders of this movement, Baghdadi and the others, are really committed fundamentalists, Muslims, who are involved in a literal interpretation of the Quran, albeit specific sections of the Quran, not the entire document. Because the one thing that we see in the Quran, as we see in the Bible, is that there's enough in there to satisfy the priorities of whoever chooses to go in there for justification and legitimacy. You can find in there whatever you want. But the fact of the matter is, what these people are preaching is not necessarily, not a distortion of Islam so much as it is a celebration of the fundamentalism of the Quran, certain aspects of it. And what one concludes from that is that the real issue here might be, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. This is more in the form of a question, not an answer to anything. But it seems to me the real question being raised here then is not so much the issue of extremism and terrorism as much as it is the issue of fundamentalism. And what you find is that fundamentalism in any religion, in other words, the unwillingness of its advocates and its devotees to recognize that the world is changing and that certain things that were true 400 and 500 years ago are not feasible and not rational, not reasonable now. Those people who refuse to accept that kind of change aren't necessarily only Muslims. But in fact, they are Christians as well. And they are fundamentalist Jews as well. And what we are into here is the issue of how to read these sources, how to read and how to deal with these kinds of ideas and the wisdom included within these documents or these books like the Bible and like the Quran. It seems to me that there's a whole issue there that needs to be pursued. And one of the things I came away from with my introduction to Smerconish's program, as much as anything else, is a recognition that he seems to be doing the best he can to achieve a semblance of balance in what is a very controversial, very involved, very deep, very complex issue of priorities and emphasis. For example, one of the things I learned, and I've done some research since I got back from Florida on this, is that Smerconish has been adamant and outspoken, has written and published pieces that are extremely critical of terrestrial talk radio, the conservative movement. Of course, we know that it began, well, obviously the contemporary movement in this country began with Buckley. But as far as talk radio is concerned, Rush Limbaugh is the name that everybody throws around, and this is the beginning. And that basically launched a movement, a conservative movement, which in many ways has produced many of the issues and concerns that frustrate so many of us today. And just because these are conservatives, even though Smerconish is a conservative, he is not the kind of conservative that appreciates or falls into line in support of the kind of extremism that is associated with what we have seen in recent years from conservative talk radio and now TV. And again, I see that as an effort on his part to strike a balance. Where is this issue going? What is the issue that I'm heading for here? One of the issues that is of major concern to me, and I think all of us can appreciate if you've been a regular listener here at the Virtual Center over the 24 months almost that we've been on, I think all of us realize that if where I stand on this, issue is that I am very concerned about the nature of the republic, because I see what many people label as American exceptionalism as opportunity, not accomplished fact. I really see the possibility of America becoming exceptional only to the degree that it is able to continually pursue and find success in its pursuit of the goals and objectives and vision of the founders. The maximization of individual freedom within the context of viable communities. The balance between individual freedom on the one hand and social order on the other. And the kinds of values that enable and permit people to live in communities and appreciate what every human being, irrespective of race, religion, color, creed, whatever, brings to the table. The faith in humanity, which convinces me that everybody has something important to contribute to the public interest, or to the commonweal, as it were. I find myself in tune with Jefferson and Madison and many of the others in terms of what they wanted this American republic to be. But I don't think we've achieved it. In fact, I will fight to the end, claiming that we have not achieved it. But even worse, if we stop trying to achieve it on the assumption that we're already there, and we look at America look at the republic not as a work in progress, but as a fact, an accomplished fact, that we must dig in our heels to preserve and defend, then shame on us. Because not only will we not fulfill the potential of this republic and reach and attain the vision and the ideals that the founders left for us, but shame on us in the sense that we will go down not even trying. On the presumption that we were already there and we've already achieved it. All the data around us, and we're all swimming in data, but every place we look, we see data that indicates that while many people in this nation are doing well, so many more are not. And if the purpose of the republic is to maximize the opportunities and the quality of life and the value system of the nation and its people, and the success is to be measured by the number of people who are experiencing success, not the small number of people who are experiencing obscene success, if you know what I mean in terms of extreme wealth. The level of inequality, we are experiencing the greatest inequality of any other nation in the world. What that tells me is that we've got a long way to go before we become exceptional. I believe that the republic that we created, that the founders created, the republic that the Constitution makes possible, provides the kinds of opportunities and the kinds of potential that makes it possible for this nation to become the true leader of the world, the true city upon the hill. Because we will have found a way to make the good life, and I don't mean snowmobiles and four-wheelers and boats and all the rest of it. I mean respect by each of us for all of us, or by all of us for each of us, or however that works best. Recognizing that if we work together and we respect each other, we can all benefit. We can all make meaningful contributions to the good of the whole. I refer back to a document we looked at some months ago here, and that is the New Nationalism speech of Theodore Roosevelt in 1910, delivered at Pottawatomie, Kansas, in which he laid out the goals of progressivism and what he believed the role of government in a progressive republic was all about. I think that's what it's about. I think that's what the founders agreed upon. They may have disagreed on means, but I think where they wanted to go, they were all pretty consistent on. I believe that most of us are consistent there as well. And one of the things I think we need, and one of the things I think we can contribute and bring to the table here at the Virtual Center, is to bring this message to more and more people. Make it possible for more and more people to appreciate and understand where true progressive thinking can bring all of us, not just a few of us, but all of us. And in the back of my mind, I can kind of hear Ursula Le Guin saying, that's kind of what I was trying to say. That's what the Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is about. At least I like to think that. Anyway, in order for all of these things to become possible, then the republic must function as a republic was designed to function given its priorities. One of the things that we see more and more in this society is polarization. The decline of those people, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, whatever, who seem to fit toward the middle of the political spectrum. And what we see is a continual movement away from the center and toward the extremes on both sides. And what we see is the polarization and the dysfunction, political dysfunction, that is the outcome of that polarization. We've talked numerous times here at the Virtual Center about the extent to which our two-party system is intended to drive people toward the center. By definition, majority rule democracy in our election, in our political system, means that the only way to win majorities is to aim your message toward those in the center, not towards those on the extremes, be right or left. Because the more your message can be trained on the extreme, the more everybody else on the political spectrum becomes threatened by that extreme. And so by definition, our two-party system seems to be designed to drive our campaigns toward the center, which means toward moderation, toward accommodation, toward negotiation, toward compromise. And what all of us appreciate is that the polarization that currently exists in American society and American politics right now is making that kind of accommodation and compromise impossible. I think all of us respect that. All of us recognize that. Most of us have culprits or people that, or movements or issues that we can blame for that. Many of us blame Republicans. Many of us blame talk radio conservatives. Many of us claim radicals on either side. Many of us blame corporate America. Many of us blame Wall Street. Many of us blame the self-interest of our political leaders and their unwillingness to put aside their own self-interest in pursuit of something that really resembles a public interest. But however we explain it or define it or try to explain it, the fact of the matter is that the existence of polarization in our society renders our political system dysfunctional. We can see it in Congress. We can see it in the inability and unwillingness of political leaders, of representatives, of Democrats and Republicans to cross the aisle and work together in pursuit of issues they agree on, rather than putting an emphasis on the things that they don't agree on. And what all of us can see is that this seems to have rendered effective government impossible. However you define it, however you explain it, I think all of us will recognize the existence of that issue. Polarization and what it seems to mean. How do you get around it? How do you fix it? How do you solve it? But what we haven't seen, and what we haven't really appreciated, I don't think up to this point, is the extent to which this situation threatens the very survival of this republic. One thing that Madison told us was that efforts at republicanism has existed throughout history and that Republican governments have always failed for one reason or another, and he believed the major reason was factions. There's nothing to guarantee that this republic won't fail also. And to be very honest with you, what I'm about, what I'd like to think the Virtual Center is about, and what Head On Radio is about, is we can't let that happen. I believe that exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, is a goal worth pursuing. I also believe that the system created by our founders is the best shot we've got at achieving that exceptionalism. And if we don't do something about polarization and the factors that produce it, shame on us. Because it'll bring down this republic. Oh, many of the people, the Cruzes and the others, the Ted Cruzes and the others, think, oh, we ought to bring it down because it's not working the way we want it to work or the way it ought to work. And we'll replace it by something better. That's not conservatism. That's insanity. I always thought conservatives valued what is and were always skeptical about the unknown. Here are people who are willing to dismantle and destroy the known in pursuit of something that they can't even explain or that they can't define. Consequently, their whole political being is based on negativism and criticism rather than innovation and creativity. They are very good at telling us what's wrong, but they're unable to basically give us any idea of how to fix it. I believe that the best opportunity we've got to really pursue successfully the issue of exceptionalism in this nation, which means an improved quality of life and appreciation of life for all of our people, and the role that that will play in improving the way of life of other people around the world who choose to, not are forced to, but choose to adopt our way of operation. All of that suggests that if the Republic is threatened, we need to find a way to deal with that threat. I believe this. I've believed it for a long time. I learned that Smerconish believes it. I have learned that one of the major foundations in America, in the United States today, the Hewlett Foundation, believes it as well. And that the Hewlett Foundation, in what it calls the Madison Initiative, has made it a priority of the foundation to address and to repair the issues of polarization and dysfunction in the Republic, recognizing full well that the very existence of the Republic is on the table. If we're not successful, the Hewlett Foundation believes that this Republic can fail. I believe that as well. During my trip to Florida, one of the guests on Smerconish's program was a gentleman named Larry Kramer. Larry Kramer was dean of the law school at Stanford University until 2 years ago, when he resigned in order to become executive director of the Hewlett Foundation. Translation: the Madison Initiative and this renewed commitment, or this commitment of the Hewlett Foundation. The Hewlett Foundation is something in excess of $8 billion. The commitment of the Hewlett Foundation to do something about dysfunction and polarization in today's society is obviously directly related to the research priorities of Larry Kramer. 3 weeks ago, Larry Kramer was invited to give the Owen Roberts guest lectureship at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. That lecture is available online. In fact, it's available on Smerconish's website, because Smerconish had Larry Kramer on for a full hour in a program labeled the Polarization Summit. The title of Larry Kramer's presentation or lecture, the Owen J. Roberts Memorial Lecture on Constitutional Law, the title, quote, "To adjust these clashing interests, negotiation and compromise as core constitutional values." It is an essay worth reading. It is an essay that is so substantive and so full of information and insight that I believe not to address it here at the Virtual Center would be an incredibly big and unfortunate mistake. What I'd like to do when we come back after a break, when we've gone a little bit beyond the top of the hour, it's 5 minutes after the top of the hour, 5 minutes after 2 in the East. I'd like to pause for our 5-minute break and then return and spend our last 55 minutes together today basically talking in a very general way about the issues raised by Larry Kramer in this piece, so that when we return live here at the Virtual Center a week from next Monday, you remember we'll have no live programming next week because we won't have the capability of production. But I'd like to return with a commitment to begin to address the issues raised. I'd like to touch on those issues in our second hour today. I'd like to pursue them in future programs when we come back together a week from Monday. But first, let's pause for a 5-minute break. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I'm Bill O'Brien. We'll be right back after a 5-minute break. Please stay with us. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome if you're just joining us to a second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I am Bill O'Brien, and if you've been with us since the beginning of our program today, I want to thank you for staying with us. I believe that the issues that we'll be touching upon in this second hour are critical issues that all of us need to take time and dwell on, because I think for all of us, this is really important stuff. I want to thank you if you're just joining us. I think you joined at an appropriate time. I hope at the end of this hour that you will agree. Let me remind you that because of we will not have the capability of production next week because Bob Kincaid and his whole apparatus is going to be moving to D.C. For the week next week. We will not be able to present live sessions of our Virtual Center, but I remind you that there are dozens and dozens of hours of archive programming available at the White Rose Society website, and as you know, thanks to our friend Horst in Taiwan, on YouTube as well. If you just go to my name, Dr. Bill O'Brien, on YouTube, you will find many of our recent programs that are available to you, along with a brief comment or line that'll give you some idea of what the topic of that particular program happens to be. And I want to thank Horst for his willingness to do that and his willingness to stick with it. I mean, we're talking months and months he's been doing this for all of us, and I appreciate it so much, and I know many of you do as well. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me, waobrien906 at gmail.com. That's waobrien906 at gmail.com. We've been talking about the issue of polarization and the issues surrounding it. I think that where we will go here is that we will begin to put the whole issue of polarization in context. I think one of the things that we'll learn, for example, and I think this is one of the things that Larry Kramer, in this presentation he delivered in his Owen Roberts address to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, entitled to adjust these clashing interests, negotiation and compromise as core constitutional values. If you go on website on Google And you can either Google Smerconish and go to his website and find the Kramer presentation there, or you can just Google the issue of polarization, Larry Kramer, the association with the name Larry Kramer, and you will find access to his piece as well. Since we will not be having our live programming next week, it seems to me to provide a tremendous opportunity for people to get their hands on that articles and give it a look. I think you will agree that it's one of the most substantive, rich, provoking pieces that I've read in a long time. And like me, the more I read it, I kept saying, my God, this is right in our wheelhouse. This is the virtual center in terms of the substance of issues that it is addressing. Please don't get the idea, however, that this is a closed book, that all the answers are here, because they are not. And of course, the biggest answer that's not there is how do we fix this mess once we begin to get some idea of the breadth and depth of the issues of concern. Obviously, the answers as to how we fix it are not there. But I hope what is there is an appreciation and a realization that once you begin to get some idea of the scope of the problem and the complexity of the problem, you begin to realize how important it is to pursue a fix, or to pursue a number of fixes in a number of different directions. What we are talking about here is major political reform in our political system. We have got to reverse what's going on, because what's going on is going to destroy this republic. I think Larry Kramer says that. Smerconish says that in pieces that he's written and in programs that he's delivered. I've suggested that directly and mostly indirectly in our program here at the Virtual Center, which is the whole idea of reading the documents, the sources, reading Madison's Vices of the Political System of the United States, reading key elements of the Federalist Papers as well as the Anti-Federalist Papers, appreciating what the issues of ratification were, appreciating the context which gives meaning to these things. As I say, this is not, by reading this article, please don't get the idea that I am suggesting in any way that in reading this article you will be exposed to the truth, to all the answers related to these particular problems. You will not. Again, what makes these worthwhile is that everybody is going to read these ideas and these issues as they are covered, and is going to react in different ways to them. Some people are going to see certain issues as priorities. Others are going to see other issues as priorities. Some of us are going to agree with Larry Kramer in some areas and disagree with him in others. I do. In fact, let me say right here at this point, before we even get into some of this, one of the conclusions, one of the things that I came away from reading this article, and I've read it 3 times, because I think it's that important and that substantive. Larry Kramer is an attorney. Larry Kramer is an expert in constitutional law. He has a background in constitutional law and American government, political science. He is not a historian. There's quite a bit of history in this piece, but he is not a historian. I'm not necessarily claiming that one must be a historian in order to deal with these issues. I'm not. In no way am I suggesting that. But if there are deficiencies in Larry Kramer's paper, I think the lack of historical appreciation and political context seems to me to be an important factor here. In previous months, we've addressed the issue of the James Madison Center at Princeton University on American ideals, which is a very scholarly, respectable, conservative think tank on matters related to the Constitution. And if you go to the website of the Madison Center for American Ideals at Princeton University, you will find in its mission statement and in its makeup and membership that while the membership consists principally of constitutional scholars and attorneys and political scientists and foreign policy experts, attorneys in law and philosophy and all the rest of it, you will not find much mention of historians. And one of the things that we addressed here at the Virtual Center early on is that good history involves the pursuit of truth. It does not involve preconceived notions and ideas. Rather, it involves addressing and engaging the source materials and basing conclusions on what the sources tell us, rather than going into the sources with preconceived notions which cause us to underline certain things and not underline other things. In other words, to go into the sources and look for the things we agree with and overlook or ignore the things that we don't. That seems to me to be one of the telling consistencies of those who are scholarly experts and professionals in the areas of constitutional law and political science. The priority of political scientists is to understand the American political system, conclude how it was designed to work, and come up with ways that it can work better. It's based on certain assumptions. Political scientists and constitutional scholars do not approach these questions and these issues uninformed. Rather, they approach the sources with well-formed, coherent ideas and priorities, truths that they have already concluded. And their role as scholars is to pursue the kinds of evidence that will reinforce what they already believe. Good history, on the other hand, not just historians, because many historians are guilty of the same thing. They approach the sources with the ideas that they already know what the truth is. They're just looking for more evidence to prove it. Good history is the ability to appreciate the knowledge and the wisdom that the sources provide for us, and to remain flexible in the kinds of conclusions that one reaches from those sources. In other words, the good historian is in pursuit of truth. The other disciplines believe they've already found it. I think that's a major difference that distinguishes history from the other disciplines. I find that evident in Larry Kramer's piece. What am I talking about? In the first few pages of Larry Kramer's article, he deals with the origins of American independence, very briefly. And in fact, what he offers, and I will share that with you here at the Virtual Center, what he offers, it seems to me, is valuable. His goal, obviously, is to get to independence in order to address what for him is the priority, which is the element or the essence of the republic that the founders created. And then he immediately goes to the overzealous idealism of the founders in the early 70s, in 1776 and thereabouts, and begins to point out that many of the problems of the 1780s, the so-called Confederation period, reveal the fact that there were misconceptions in the idealism and the spirit of 1776. And that the republic that was created in the 70s had to be reformed, or the republic and independence itself would be lost. And so consequently, the Constitution of the United States was developed in order to rescue and save the republic. The implication here that Larry Kramer brings to us is that the establishment of the Republic and the creation of the Constitution of the United States as the way to implement that Republic are coherent, consistent, and connected. That the fashioning of the Constitution of the United States is merely the completion of the product of the Republic. Where I differ here is that I would say that Larry Kramer is ignoring the realities of the Confederation period. He's buying, in fact, he mentions Madison's vices of the political system of the United States, and mentions some of the problems of the Confederation, the political problems that promise to sink independence, sink the Republic if reform is not made. In essence, he is buying Madison's criticism of the Confederation period, as do almost all textbooks on this particular subject. What he really doesn't take seriously, I believe, he mentions it, but what I don't believe he really takes seriously enough is the extent to which the Confederation, the Articles of Confederation, is the political system which is designed to implement and preserve and protect and sustain the Republic. Not the Constitution. In other words, if there is consistency between the Republic and the constitutional system created to implement it, that consistency exists between the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation, not between the Declaration and the Constitution of the United States. In order to create consistency between the Republic and the Constitution, it became necessary for the framers, for Madison, Hamilton, and the others, to redefine republicanism in order to fit the constitutional system they felt it necessary to create. I do not disagree with Larry Kramer that Madison was a committed philosophical Republican. Madison believed in republicanism. He believed in popular government. He believed in the consent of the governed. He believed in the need for people, for citizens in a republic, to reflect the kind of virtue, the kind of civic virtue necessary to sustain the republic. But he recognized, as he laid out in the Vices document, that it was too idealistic, that his faith in the citizenry was overplaced. That's not really the right word. Was overemphasized. He had too much faith. He was too naive or too idealistic. And that Madison, as a realist, recognized that there needed to be reforms if republicanism was going to survive. But the kind of reforms that seem to be indicated by the problems Madison lays out suggests the need to redefine republicanism itself. And that's what ratification of the Constitution involves, is a redefinition of republicanism. What does this mean? Why do I think this is a significant difference between Larry Kramer and myself? Because I believe what it suggests is that the system to create republicanism is the priority of the framers. In other words, the given is the constitutional system. The variable is republicanism. For anti-federalists, however, the given is republicanism. The variable is the constitutional system. And I think ratification of the Constitution involves the total reversal of those priorities. What was an end to the framers of the Declaration of to the founders in the Declaration of Independence? The end was republicanism. The means was the Articles of Confederation. For Madison and the framers of the Constitution, the end is the constitutional system. The means is republicanism. The only way to understand and appreciate that is to be sensitive to the context, the history of the 1780s. Because what is happening in the 1780s is what helps us explain and understand the ingredients of the constitutional system designed to deal with it. Because if those priorities of the 80s are not addressed in the constitutional reforms undertaken at the Constitutional Convention, then the entire experiment, Madison believes, will go down the drain, will be lost. So consequently, what has to change are the circumstances and the situations which lead to the Constitution. That's the end. That's the goal. In order to create that kind of consistency, in order to create consistency, the very idea of republicanism has to change in order to fit that alternative constitutional system. And the founders do that. But the fact of the matter is, if you do not appreciate the history of the 1780s, and you just go to Madison and Hamilton and the Federalist Papers for your information, then what you will do is accept without question the changed view of republicanism without even recognizing that there's been a change. It seems to me that that change is vital. Because it seems to me that the ideals of republicanism as espoused in 1776, to me, are much more meaningful and much more substantive and much more creditable and much more humane and much more important than the ingredients of republicanism as used within the framework of the Constitution. How do I know that? Why do I believe that? When asked in the early 19th century to define the ingredients of Republican government, because the Constitution of the United States in Article 4 guarantees a Republican form of government to the states. And when the state of Rhode Island goes to the Supreme Court and asks the Supreme Court for guidance on what the elements, what the issues, what the essence of Republican government is, the Supreme Court dodges the issue, claims that it is not a judicial matter but a legislative matter, and kicks the ball down the road, kicks the can down the road, as it were, and says that Congress is the one that has to answer that question. What the Supreme Court is saying in the early 1840s, and I believe 1842, when this case was heard by the court, the decision was rendered by the court. What the court seems to be saying is, we can't give you an itemized definition of Republican government. That's going to change as circumstances change. But what doesn't change is the Constitution. So in a sense, the Constitution has become the goal, the essence, the end. And republicanism has reverted from goal to means, to a variable. What the court is saying is, we'll make republicanism whatever it has to be in order to keep it consistent with the constitutional system that the framers created in Philadelphia in 1787. That to me is a major issue that I think would contribute meaningfully to Larry Kramer's paper. But that doesn't take away one iota the value of the paper. Because what Kramer accepts as a constitutional scholar is Madison's interpretation of republicanism as it's been changed, but he doesn't know that. He's taking what Madison says in the Federalist Papers and what he writes afterwards as republicanism, as if there had been no change whatsoever, and proceeds accordingly. The point is that the entire approach to republicanism from that point on becomes the essence of what political science is all about, what constitutional scholarship is all about. Basically, what Madison says and what Larry Kramer agrees with is that republicanism is all about the political system, all about the operation of America's electoral system. You'll remember that in one of the Federalist Papers, and I can't give you the specific one right now, Hamilton makes the point that if, I think this is 78, if government is popular, if the people can participate in the election of their representatives, then that in essence is republicanism. And so consequently, everything associated with making the political system work to political scientists is the essence of republicanism. That's what they focus on. That's what their agenda is about. That's where their research is focused. But the fact of the matter is, that approach to republicanism is not what the founders believed in 1776 when they bought into the vision of the Declaration of Independence. That's not what they believed Republican government was about. They believed, the founders believed, that truth, wisdom, was to be found in the voice of the people. And that the whole role of government is to implement that voice, that will, what Rousseau called the general will, the public interest. Madison's system of republicanism, as implemented within the Constitution of the United States, is not based directly on the will of the people so much as it is on the informed, educated will of the people. Madison buys the idea that the voice or the consent of the people is critical, but Madison believes that it is a consent or a will that must be informed and educated. And the political system is set up and designed to provide that education. What Madison and Hamilton assume as givens is that the entire system of government in this republic is driven by decisions that are reached through negotiation and compromise, Madison's recognition of various and competing factions. The assumption is that these factions, these competing and alternative and different points of view, must be shared and negotiated and compromised to the point that the public interest, the general will, the best interest, will emerge as a product of that negotiation, that willingness to compromise. That, Madison believes, and Hamilton believes, is the essence of the American system. That's the issue that Kramer's paper focuses on. Namely, that the entire constitutional system of the United States requires compromise, negotiation, and moderation, and a willingness of people to meet and talk and discuss and converse and have dialogue and find the points of agreement and proceed accordingly. And that the entire system that the framers created in the Constitution of the United States is driven by negotiation and compromise. To Kramer, to Smerconish, and to me, polarization is not the reason that the Republic is in trouble. Polarization is a reflection of something more. Namely, that negotiation and compromise, for whatever reason, have become impossible in our political system today. Translation, conclusion. Our entire political system is built upon and absolutely requires the willingness to negotiate and compromise. If that willingness and ability to compromise and to negotiate and to have conversation is not happening, then the Republic, as fashioned by Madison and Hamilton and the Federalists, cannot survive. Consequently, the polarization that exists in today's political world, the dysfunction that exists in Washington, the dysfunction that is existing between states and local municipalities that we've been talking about in the last couple of days. All of these things speak of a political system that is against compromise, that looks at compromise as a dirty word, that promises to punish politicians for even expounding a willingness to compromise. Basically, what is potentially breaking this republic is an approach to issues which claims that we know what the right answers are, and our job is to persuade those who don't see it to see it. It is not to compromise with those who don't, because we've got the truth. They need it. Therefore, why should we sit down and compromise and negotiate when we've got the answers? They need to come to us. That is the system that is prevailing in American politics today. Polarization, then, is not the problem, it's symbolic of that problem. It reflects a problem, it does not define it. And the fact of the matter is As long as polarization continues, as long as compromise and negotiation are viewed as dirty words, as long as those who express any willingness at all to compromise are seen by big contributors, by the Koch brothers and others, as people that must be defeated in the next election, because rather than support the party line, they are willing to negotiate with others in order to find out what it is. We know what it is. Literally, it's my way or the highway. And you can't negotiate that. You can't compromise that. Consequently, the republic as created by the founders, which is built on the need to compromise and negotiate, which is built on the idea that the vast majority of elected representatives are moderates, be they conservative-leaning or liberal-leaning, left-leaning or right-leaning. The fact of the matter is they are all moderates. They are people that disagree on a number of issues but agree on a number of others. And their priority must be to find the points of agreement and move forward and work out the points of disagreement over time. Those people do not exist in our political system anymore. Our political parties have become polarized. Representatives vote the party line way more often than they need to if the political system designed by the founders is going to function. Therefore, these people, these extremists, and there's no question today that the bulk of the extreme is on the right because they are in the driver's seat. They've got momentum. They're moving. And they're justifying their movement by claiming it must mean that we're right. It doesn't mean that they're right. It means that they have power. And they are driving moderates into hiding. And they are willing to punish those who would not negotiate and who would compromise. They are literally destroying the republic. And I know that there are many people who believe that this is a Christian nation ordained by God and as such cannot fail. If God's behind it, then it will never disappear. It'll be successful. There are a lot of people in today's world who believe that. But the fact of the matter is republics throughout history have failed. And there's no guarantee that this one won't either. The only way that this republic, as designed by the framers, can sustain itself is to begin to reverse the trend and begin literally to whittle away at the realities of polarization. We have got to begin to talk. We have got to begin to dialogue. We have got to begin to share our ideas and our thoughts. We have got to begin to disagree where we disagree and agree where we should agree. Always within the process that we're all after the same thing. We must respect other points of view, legitimate points of view. This game is not about silencing the opposition, but rather making the abstract idea of a marketplace of ideas operative. We have got to invite conversation. We've got to invite dialogue. We've got to get people to put the issues on the table so all of us can work through them and figure out how this has to work. That, and finding ways to do it, is the salvation for the Republic. That, and finding ways to do it, is the mission of the Virtual Center from the very beginning. I am so excited to know that Larry Kramer and the Hewlett Foundation and Michael Schmaconish and other prominent people are beginning to recognize the threat and are willing to take it on. We are not alone. I think it behooves all of us to find ways to make this work, to look for solutions. But before we can, we've got to recognize that there are problems that are in need of solution. We have got to begin to educate our citizenry. The issue of civic responsibility in the title of this program, the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, speaks to the fact that in order for the Republic to survive, it requires the informed involvement of citizens. Massive numbers of citizens, not just a few. Massive. We have got to do something about our K through 12 education system. We have got to get to the sources. We have got to turn away from this idea that the only way to educate citizens in a republic is to indoctrinate and brainwash them. Tell them what to think rather than teach them how to think. The roadmap is clear. Kind of. It's complex, but it's clear. We've got to begin to do things differently than we did before. And the fact that Larry Kramer has done such a brilliant job of laying out the issues, and the fact that people are beginning to appreciate what the issues are. And here we have an organization, the Hewlett Foundation, which is valued upwards of $8 billion, that is committing a major portion of its resources to this venture, not only suggests a promise of possible success, it also tells us that this is damn serious. And we better get about the job. I think that this whole thing validates the Virtual Center. I think the whole thing validates the programming here at the Virtual Center. I think we've got to recognize how important what we're doing is. We need to improve it. I need to improve it. We need to move into video interaction rather than just audio. We need to find ways to invite more conversation and more dialogue at the Virtual Center. We've got to recognize that me giving the phone number at the beginning of each hour is not enough. That literally we have got to encourage people out there to feel comfortable bringing their ideas to the table and talking about them, because only by doing that, not only can we arrive at a better understanding of what the issues are, but more important, we need to expand the number of people that can join us in this conversation. We need to become key instruments in the education of the American citizenry in defense of the Republic. That's our mission. That's what Larry Kramer is talking about. That's what the Hewlett Foundation is talking about. That's what Smirnov Summit on Polarization with Larry Kramer is about. If you get a chance to visit those during next week, because we will not have programming here next week. If you get a chance to visit those, I think we will all come back with a much richer backlog. Our quivers will be full of informed arrows, and we can begin to address the issues. What is polarization? What causes it? What in our political system is making it worse? What are the factors that have caused it? What are the best ways to address it? What are the ways to fix this political system so that the ideals and the vision of the founders can really be realized? That's our mission. That's what we're about. I think it's one of the most important ideas we can have. We've reached the top of the hour. It is 3 p.m. in the East. Thank you so very much for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, wonderful week next week, because we won't be together live. Please enjoy, take care of yourself, be safe, and thank you.